Whoa!
Hello. Hey, finale.
There it is.
It is.
I put
This one went fast.
I dressed my best for today.
Yeah.
We'll be talking about sports.
I see that it's a fancy day for you in general. I see the ring lights reflected in your.
Yeah, I usually don't wear my glasses. But see.
Yeah, very nice. What are these that you're wearing?
This is my hometown soccer jersey, FCMS, Le Feu Sacré. Those who know.
Amazing.
Amazing.
Um, I'll be curious to know what Shireen Ahmed is sporting today.
Why not?
So we are war minus the shootouts, and I think we are doing this in a way for you, Greg. And then I get to have little pleasures like here you talk about cricket and things like that. I don't follow sports as avidly as you do. And certainly my dear friend Sean Jacobs, who's also joining, another avid fan. And I think before anything else, the one thing that I've been doing that kind of is forcing me to read more and think more about this is that I've been teaching a class on gender and film, two classes actually, and we did a whole module on women athletes, films of women athletes. So I'm hoping some of those students will come check this out as well, because we did Bend It Like Beckham, and Shireen Ahmed is the expert on the film, and she's met the filmmaker and all that jazz.
A world-renowned scholar of Bend It Like Beckham.
She is a world-renowned scholar of this groundbreaking film, and she'll tell us more. But before anything else, will you tell people why you picked the title "War Minus the Shootouts"?
Because I love puns. No, but it's a quote from a very somewhat famous essay by George Orwell. Of course, I forget the title, but he was writing about the tour of the Hungarian soccer team in England in the 50s, and described just how brutal and nationalistic those games were. And he described football as war minus the shooting, which is the phrase that usually is excerpted from this article. So I figured we'd turn that into something funny.
Yeah. And the shootouts generally look down on, though I think it's exciting.
Yeah, penalty shootouts. Everybody hates them, but everybody loves them too.
I love them. It's just the you people, you snobs who hate them. But anyway,
Back to you.
Huh?
It's stuff on the heart, Becky.
Is it? It's stuff on the heart. Okay, that's an interesting way to think about it. I just thought it's just I'm not sophisticated. But what I'm saying is this week has been a lot of, the T20 Cricket World Cup is going on. Now, this is one game I do know I grew up with and couldn't ignore it even if I wanted to. Basically what happened is the Indian cricket team were to play they got an ass whooping. They were to play a fierce game against Pakistan, which are historically some of the most intense matches. Growing up, there's been there's a kind of interesting relationship. I mean, you think about these matches, you think about the national rivalries, you think about all the horrible violence between the two countries. But at the same time, there's also this erotic kind of interest in the Pakistani team. Like growing up, those were always like the hot players. There's there's just all this drama. But anyway, the thing that's been happening that was suddenly very US was that the Indian team took the knee for Black Lives Matter, and of course it made no sense at all, just because the amount of crazy things happening in India, and they've never shown solidarity. And then the internet erupted. We had Suchitra Vijayan, who's been on Decolonize that, and she's like, this is what I call clown shit. Take a knee for India and against this regime, spineless and feckless, she called them. And then another journalist who said the people who never opened their mouth against violent religious majoritarianism and caste atrocities in India. This is the Indian cricket team. And of course, what I realized that all of this is going on, and then Shireen came into the studio, and she's here right now, and she reminded us that actually, sorry, not this, but she reminded us that Mithali Raj, who is this dynamic and amazing woman cricket player, was actually just awarded India's highest award for athletes, called a Khela Ratna. So all this other news, and then this news not as exciting, I guess, for the social medias. But
well, I mean, what you said also, the headlines I saw, because I can't say I follow cricket very closely myself. The French team is terrible, as you might know, but I don't think that's one. Anyway, so before India took the knee, there was a kerfuffle in the South Africa team because in their first game, the entire team minus 3 white players took the knee. And when their federation sort of demanded that they take the knee before that game against the West Indies, one of the white players decided not to play rather than take the knee. And apparently at this point, he's apologized and said he would take the knee before the next game. But this is a pretty interesting extension of knee taking, right? Coming from American football a few years back, and one single player, it's become sort of a global conversation. And, as you say, like very much entwined with geopolitics all over the globe and a variety of sports.
Right. And I think without further ado, we should probably, Sean Jacobs, I'm sure, has something to say about the South Africa aspect of all this. But we should invite them in. But before that, let's see them. Let's, just kind of see them.
For salvation, running out the door of the old gas station. He makes it to the pump and say, don't ask no question. Quick, get into the car, we're heading for redemption. I want you to see how nice the springtime can be. He slams the door.
Yay!
Welcome, everybody. Sean Jacobs, you're muted, and here's Shireen and Greg. We showed beautiful photos of these beautiful people, but should we also read out their official bios?
Let's do it.
So it's quite embarrassing before you go on.
I actually love
what
that.
Is this?
What
is this?
I love that slideshow, and I'm like, can I get a copy of that?
I'll send you.
All right. So
Go ahead, Greg.
Is associate professor international affairs at the New School in New York City. He's part of a regular live Twitterscapes conversation with Tony Karen, with whom he co-taught a course on global soccer politics for over a decade at the New School. He's also the author of Media and Post-Apartheid South Africa, Post-Colonial Politics in the Age of Globalization. You saw that cover earlier. And the edited volume, Apartheid Israel, The Politics of an Analogy. He's currently developing a project about football called 11 Named People, which I'm very excited to hear about. And I say hi. I feel like I've known you forever, even though we've never, we still have to meet face to face.
No, we've never met in person. We threatened to meet somewhere in Brooklyn or something, but it never comes off. I don't know what's wrong with us. But that's a New York problem. That's very much a kind of New York problem. People, you can live in New York City forever with somebody, but like you could never meet them.
So I'm gonna say something about Shireen very quickly. I think she needs no introduction out of all the four of us, but Shireen Ahmed gave us a fun bio of her. Is a single mom of four, self-proclaimed Bend It Like Beckham scholar, and I would add world-renowned to that, and a multi-platform sports journalist. She is the co-creator, co-host of the Burn It All Down feminist sports podcast, which is absolutely brilliant. And she's currently teaching sports media and sports journalism at X University, formerly known as Ryerson in Toronto, Canada. She drinks coffee as a tool of resistance, she writes, but actually I think more than coffee, humor is Shireen's tool of resistance. If you're ever following a game, any game, and she's live tweeting, it's just kind of roll on the floor laughing tweets. And I recently also found that she edited this special issue of Mizna journal called The Playing Field. So she's, oh, there it is. Yeah. All right. Let me dive into the first question, which I want to direct to Shireen. And so essentially,
Before you go on, I thought you were going to ask us why. Because Sereen's wearing a shirt and I'm not. She's wearing a team shirt and I'm not.
Okay, I will be transparent. I was wearing a Toronto Raptors hoodie, and then Buckley was like, I wonder what Shireen's going to wear. I ran upstairs, and I put on the kit that I forgot that I said I was going to wear. So you're good. So if Sean, you need to slip out casually and go put on a maillot, you go do that.
My point is I support, like I always said, like I love teams from port cities. So I kind of have multiple kind of loyalties. So I don't want to wear like, and then if I had to wear the Marseille, Olympic Marseille pants, I'd have to like stand up or something. I don't have a shirt. I just have like a practice pants. But I'm a supporter of Liverpool Football Club. So
I think we all are.
We all are. It's just, it's kind of boring now. Everybody's a Liverpool supporter these days. But I could say that I was a Liverpool supporter. I would say my dad was a Liverpool supporter. And then I became one in the like early 1980s when I was like a little kid. So I'll take that. I'll say that I was around for Howard Gale, for John Barnes. I was around for those times. So I'm a Liverpool supporter. I'm also sometimes a Porto supporter, but that's because the only South African to have won a European Champions League medal played for Porto, Benny McCarthy. So and it happens to be a team from a port.
I'm gonna move this to my question, which I'm very curious about, Sean. But you have plenty of room to tell us more about port teams. So basically, I just wanted to direct this first to Shireen, but then also Sean, because I know a bit about his background. But essentially, like both of you write and reflect on sports, and like the politics of sports, as well as like the pleasure involved. And I just wanted to kind of know what is the sort of reason, like personal reasons that drew you to it. What were the family dynamics that eventually brought you here? Like what is the journey?
I mean, essentially, I think I've always been very connected to sports. I've always been a disruptor of sorts. I didn't have a language to say it. And I don't think when you're 6 and you're 5, and I grew up in a port city. I'm from Halifax, Nova Scotia originally. This is why Sean and I have this vibe. But I was the only I was the only racialized young girl in a French school. And football was the way in which I could connect. And I did a TEDx talk a couple of years ago, and I talked about this because it's a question I get often. Why the sport, and why soccer in particular? Because in my brain at the time, and even in my brain when I was 4 or 5, and even my brain at 44 now, football makes sense to me as a sport, as a game. And it's a really beautiful way to include 22 people with little equipment. And I felt very connected. And as somebody who very often felt on the outside and in the margin, I was very rambunctious. I happened to be a forward. I'm a striker. So, I was gregarious and I was tenacious, and that was helpful in that position. Whereas society is like, okay, you have to stop talking, Shireen. You have to tone it down. Nobody wanted me to tone it down on the pitch. So when people say I felt at home there's a reason why people say that, because you feel connected and you feel like you can be authentic. And I played a lot. Never mind my terrible shadist community that was always concerned that I was getting darker in the sun, because that's a reality in a lot of South Asian communities. And my mom didn't care. They were like, oh my God, you're never going to get her married. My mom's like, she's 8, calm down. And I don't care. And I played. And so I really, really loved that. And I brought it into my life, and I had parents that encouraged it. Although I love Bennett like Beckham, that wasn't my story. I didn't have parents who resisted against the idea. In fact, they were super, super supportive. And I took that into my life. So anyway, football's played a huge role. Essentially, why journalism and why I do the work I do is because nobody was doing it. and nobody was reporting on Muslim women in sport or talking about their challenges. And I had been doing it. I started to do this because I didn't like the way it was being done, quite frankly. And I wanted somebody with a different lens and an understanding, whether it was geopolitics, whether it was an understanding of faith-based choices that women have, wanted to know. And then I started to investigate on why they were being excluded. When I say they, I mean Muslim women. And I'm not, and what I do when I establish is that all Muslim women don't wear a hijab. They may not choose to do so. I'm also not glossing over the fact that women don't have bodily agency in countries that are Muslim majority. But what I am saying is not everybody does this. And so, but the systems of xenophobia, gendered Islamophobia, and racism and misogynoir that women feel are the same. So I wanted to go in and talk about that. And it all came to a head, actually, ironically, this summer. I've been complaining on Twitter for so long that, you know, it's garbage, the industry is terrible. And then suddenly NBC calls and I'm like, you know, we'd really like you to connect the work that you've been doing with what's happening with the Norwegian beach handball team. And I was like, wow, I'm not prepared for this to happen in real time, because what am I going to complain about now? Trust me, there's a lot to complain about still. So anyways, the connections about systems of misogyny and control of women's bodies within sport, which is what I learned on the way, is what's keeping me here. Also, I did my graduate degree. I recently finished and then started teaching. But my focus was on Muslim women in sport and digital activism, and also their inclusion and in their self-identity through sport. That's really important to me. Yeah. And there's so many things. And, you know, you all know, you're academics as well. You get stuck into this. Should I do a PhD? And then I think about comps. I'm like, no, that's never happening.
Oh gosh, don't do a PhD. You don't need it. You're way more erudite than all of us put together. Sean, what's your
I mean, it's a whole bunch of stuff. I would say it's like a whole bunch of stuff. Like at some level, it's specifically South Africa is a country that I don't know what the word is, refracts its identity through sport. Like it's the nation's apartheid did kind of made sport really important in terms of like how whiteness, whiteness as a project that was working, so they had to win. For Black people, I think it became after a while like if we could show that we were good at sports because they said we weren't, So there's I think there's that larger context which I can go into more. But I just think like I grew up in Cape Town in South Africa, port city. So there is a rich like history of sport that was organized in opposition to apartheid. But I want to make this clear, like many of the people that played that kind of sport, they didn't spend all their energy going, when I get on the field, this is up yours to apartheid. They were just also like playing sport. So I played like school sport. I played a lot of rugby. I was in the rugby when I was a kid. It was done by weight classes. So I played in no one will believe this. I don't know what that is in pounds, but in high school I played in the 62.5 kilogram team. I mean, that sounds bizarre now. When I was 17 and 18, that was my weight, and I played mostly like number 8, which is like the 8th man. I played flank, stuff like that. A prop, lock forward. So in the front, I played in the front, but I really loved football. It's like a weird thing. I wasn't very good at it. This is like something I could not get on. My son seems to have like a natural ability to like play football. I just never had it, but I did play. If I'm on Facebook and I like talk about my kids, you can see I'm on the old man social media, and I talk about my kids' progress with football. People who know me from like in clubs I played in and from high school, they were like, why don't you tell your son how good you were? So they spend like their energy just kind of making fun of me, because I was that kind of person. I played for a team in Cape Town called, when I was an adult, I played for a team called Parktown United, like in the SAFA leagues, like the lower leagues of like the national, body of football. But anyway, so in this team, these guys will tell you, if somebody got like, sometimes I was on the field if somebody didn't turn up. I was on the field if somebody got an injury and blood came out of their head. Only when blood came out of their head, their arm, the coach would be like, Sean, come on. So if you're like that, I think you are just obsessed then with kind of, you want to read about it mostly. And so just, I can tell you millions of stories about these things, but the one I think that's really for me was when I was in high school. Even though I was kind of rude and did all kinds of terrible things, which I won't repeat here, I was also like the best student. This is just a fact. I was the best student. So I was like, I would always go to the library, and the librarian would Mr. Alexander, he would always give me like the new books and tell me what, read this, check this out. And there was this guy called Brian Glanville who writes for the World Soccer magazine. I don't know if you guys know him. This is like a famous kind of English football magazine that you could get it under. It was anybody who was reading it around the world. It was paper, and he also wrote like the books about the World Cup. And these books would come out; they would be like refreshed after every World Cup. He would like bring out a new edition. So I read and reread that book, and every time the new book came out, I would know the story. So if you think back, South Africa got television in 1976. Our family, we could only afford a TV like in the mid 1980s. So my introduction to football was mostly like either you went to a stadium, you played it, or you read about it. So a lot of stuff that I now will find on YouTube, I'll be like, the 1982 team of Brazil, which is one of my favorite teams. I read about them. Like it was the lyricism, like the beauty of it was mostly through writing. I didn't see it. I never saw that. I never saw those games. The first World Cup I saw on TV was 1986, which is the other Port City connection, Napoli, which is the other team I support. But you can see like there's just we all have our own different ways that we come to it. But I do think I come from a place in which there was an obsession with sport, and sport was also a way through which people could express their dissatisfaction with a practice. In fact, one of the key, and if we want to ask me later about this guy who didn't want to kneel, I can tell those stories. But there was a big sports movement against apartheid called the South African Council on Sports, which was founded in the mid 70s by most, Black sports people. And their slogan was like, no normal sport in an abnormal society. And they played a big role in kind of organizing and mobilizing people against apartheid. There's a longer story about how they sort of fell apart. But I played in those leagues, and I kind of remember like, just playing, practicing, learning about sport. And some great people who came out of that league or those leagues in many different sports. But yeah, those are like, I can tell you many other stories, but that's the story.
Sure. I like also the point about the learning about it through the like really good writing about it too, which reminded me of the film Offside by Jafar Panahi, where all those girls in Iran are kicked out of the stadium, and then they just listen to the radio while the game happens in the background, and that's how we watch it. But anyway, let's get to the question. Sorry, Greg, go ahead.
So I think both of you get to something that is maybe both obvious and also enormous, right? Which is we're at the confluence of very individual, personal dynamics, and then absolutely and global dynamics. And Shireen, I'm thinking of your handle on Twitter and other places, which I believe comes from insults you once received on the soccer field. And of course, it seems like one obvious place where your personal trajectory meets headlines that got multiplied, I feel, in the past few years, right? The place of Muslim women specifically in sports. I come from France, so I don't need to tell you what that conversation has been like there. But you started pointing it out. Right? It's sort of a global conversation at some level. Yet every country has a totally different treatment of it. So I'm just curious if you can say more about how those trajectory intersect in your career, and how that directs the way you speak about issues like hijab in sports and the place of Muslim women in sports.
Yeah, thank you for that. One of the things that I didn't mention in the beginning, also just being mindful of time, was that my decision to wear a hijab happened when I was 20. And as a result of that, my own football career was thwarted. I played for my university team, University of Toronto, and I played for a club team in Toronto as well. But when I say thwarted, let's be realistic. I played left bench on the university team. So I say that like I wasn't going to go semi-pro or pro. I just want to contextualize what I'm talking about. But the idea is that I didn't have an option. And that's what happens with a deliberate exclusion. of people, which is what I consider deliberate. And also in the process that I talk about in the systems of exclusion, which include racism and sexism, particularly with racialized women or women in the global south. That's what we see happening. Those that make the decision are in the boardrooms. So with Gregory, so with France, I've always had a very, how should I say this? Okay, grad school has taught me to say it's complicated. All the academics say it's complicated. So that's what I learned. So I will say it's complicated. I mean, I've had a love obsession with France since before Zizou. Okay, since way before. Like, I'm a long-suffering Arsenal fan, and I'll blame Thierry Henry for that. Yes. So, and honestly, I struggle because it's, you know, that whole thing that you're cheering for everyone black. For me, I'm cheering for everyone racialized on France. Like, that's literally what it turns out to. And I don't include Antoine Griezmann in that category. I don't care what his Halloween costume is. So the point here is that I love, for some reason, I feel connected to this. And a dear friend of mine, Laurent Dubois, who is an academic, has written very much on it. And he and I co-wrote, especially there was a particular striking set of images at Sports Illustrated, or it was not Sports Illustrated. I think it was L'Equipe that put it out in 2015. And Jessica Huara, who identifies as Muslim and, you know, puts out Eid Mubarak. She had a really cool photo that covered her face, like, and then a veil in her eyes. And we did some research on that, and I wrote in Reflection about that, because at the time, and currently, and this is 6 years ago, over 6 years ago, for those that don't know, France is still the only country in the world to ban women from coaching, playing, or assisting, or any admin to do with football if they choose to wear a scarf, if they choose to wear hijab. And even though FIFA struck down the hijab ban in 2014 officially, France still continues to do this based on, you know, secularism and their notion of that, what they define as secularism. So that's where my entry point comes in. I have also been connected very closely with Haifa Tlili, who is an academic in France, who advises and is part and founded a group called Les Hijabeuses. And Les Hijabeuses are activists in France, young racialized women and their allies, including like Alliance Citoyenne and the Decolonize, who are an incredible club out of France that I suggest everybody check out. They are run by queer women, but they support immigrant women. They support refugee women with football as their platform. It's an incredible group, and I had the pleasure of meeting them a couple of years ago in person, and when I was in France for the Women's World Cup. So all of these things come around. Now, the reason why I focus on France is because I, you know, my own personal experience, I know what it's like to be excluded. And there's this, I'll just sort of wrap this up saying that my attentions are globally. Like, I'm wearing a kit from the Afghan women's national team in solidarity with those players who had to survive a horrible sexual assault and a scandal by the head of their federation. But again, I keep reminding people that it, you know, for a while it was like, oh, well, that happens over there. That happens in Afghanistan. That happens in France. It's been reported in Haiti. It's been reported in Mauritius. It's been reported in all these other places. It also happens here. I mean, we've seen egregious cases in sport of abuse by men in power, and this is not a localized issue. Yes, there's different, you know, political issues that play into that and nuances, but this is a global issue where men in power are violent, and there's violence in sport. Like, football itself is not the problem. Football, the idea of it is pure. It's beautiful. It's played in pitches, in backyards, in street alleys. It's played in conflict. It's used as a tool of healing for PTSD in refugee camps.
Yeah.
Like, we know this, right? So what is the thing? So I'll just end on this thing that makes me think. Arundhati Roy is an Indian feminist, and she says there's no such thing as the voiceless. There's only the deliberately silenced or the preferably unheard. So my role is to bring forward, amplify those voices, because I do believe that nobody is voiceless. It's that their voices are not given a chance to ring out. So that's where I come in.
So powerful, Shireen. That's really intense, and of course, it makes me think about all the ways in which this very powerful, you know, people in power in sports are now kind of constructing and reconstructing gender. You know, I'm thinking about Castra Semenya and also Annette Negesa.
Duty Chan.
Yeah, Duty Chan. And being forced to take those, you know, they've been, what is it? What is it even called? The tests for checking hormones or kind of verifying which sex they belong to, and then of course the conversations around bodies also then go into the mental health issue, which is, I'm thinking now of Naomi Osaka and then Simone Biles, who happen to be women of color, Black women, who have been in these massive mental health scandals too. So I don't know what are we to do with this? Like how to think about this, how to resist it,
I mean, one of the things that I and Sean, I'm happy to defer to your comments as well, is that the media has been complicit in this. I work in an industry, and I will blame the media 100% because I'm part of that industry. In Canada, where I was at, on Turtle Island, rather, because I'm on Indigenous land, is very specifically 95% white, able-bodied, cishet men. That's the industry. So you will see, and that. The stories that come out, investigative stories, be it about abuse or about corruption, are either done by rogue individuals. They're not done by networks as a whole, because that's not what journalism as it was intended is, the way it's manipulated in sport. So there are disruptors, or are people who do this, and it's not to say, and it can get discouraging. Absolutely, it can get discouraging. I think about quitting and opening a cat cafe weekly because I'm like, this sucks. I don't want to be the abuse lady or the racism lady, but you know what? Someone has to do it. And I'm very grateful. I mean, that's why, product placement is very important. This is my Burn It All Down mug. But I'm also very grateful to have been with a group of women who have helped us create something that I spent years of my career pitching stories to editors who didn't reply. So then it's like, fuck this, let's do our own podcast. And we did. And we're careful about it. The journalism matters, the reporting and the commentary matter. And it created a space, which was, at the time, almost 5 years ago. We've been doing this 4.5 years. Unbelievable. Even what Tony and Sean do. Yeah. Like teaching, like at the New School, and doing a course, which, I've been, honored enough to sit in on. The way that
you came to speak at it.
Yes, thank you. And the way that they did that, like that encouraged me. Dave Zirin's writing. I mean, Gregory's work, back to your work, like work of people who are critical in sport. That's where I look to. And there's so many people out there that are like, yeah, we want to combine. And too often there is a gap. And my dear friend, Jules Boykov, who I learn from all the time, he told me there's a gap between academics and media, and we need to bridge those gaps. We need to, because, academics are in their ivory towers and conferences with like paywalls to journals. I had been cited in journal articles that I couldn't access.
Right.
And so then I text you all and I'm like, can you get this for me? And you do. I mean,
yeah, of course. Sean, what's the South Africa, like the Caster Semenya, I mean, that's where it all began. I know that it's been happening in India too, but to me, I see it within the SA scene. Like, what's your thoughts?
I mean, the one thing I will to kind of what's called shameless self-promotion, since Shireen held up a cup, but Shireen was on we do this Twitter's what's it called, these things? Twitter Spaces. I gotta get this. I want to say Twitter Spaces. And we had Shireen and Jennifer Doyle, who's I think at Riverside, University of California, Riverside. And it's in the podcast, she actually said, in the space, she said that she used to be from a left wing. I used to remember reading her blog in the old days. But one of the key things that both of you pointed out in that space was the extent to which women's sport is run by men. Like people, like when the allegations come out, people's like, oh, it's some rogue dude. But it's like, for some reason, like if you just take like soccer or football, most of the teams, like the coaches, the associations often are run by men. So a lot of like, in the case of the Haitian one, the coach that got caught here in the US example. So it's like, I think that's a key, that's the Caster Semenya story. If you go back and you look at all the people that did her in or did terrible things, like, so in front of the cameras, they would say, we're going to protect Caster, she's one of us, etc. and so on. And then it turns out that the head of the South African, what's called Athletics South Africa, that he basically had okayed, this kind of invasive testing. And so I remember the team coach, he resigned because he came to the media and spoke about what the head of athletics South Africa has done. So there's that aspect of how women's sport is organized. And to Shireen's point, it's been probably, if it wasn't for social media to empower people like Simone Biles or Naomi Osaka. By the way, there's a really good documentary about her on Netflix. I think it was produced by LeBron James's company. But if it wasn't for kind of all these other platforms and social media and so on, we would never get a sense of like all this terrible things that were happening in gymnastics or soccer or track and field. So I think that for me is like one of the sort of the good things that came out of it. But I want to go back to something else from like your previous question when you ask about like how does one, I think Greg asked about these kind of how do you make these global connections, and I'll just give like two quick examples. For me, for example, growing up in a place like South Africa, where South Africa is being banned from international football, and rightly so by FIFA because of the apartheid policies there. You had in the 1980s people start identifying with football teams in like other places, and particularly in Britain, because that's what you see in the newspaper. That's the one game that you could see on a Saturday on your TV, that the game of the week if you want. And so people sort of live through the kind of the politics of these teams outside South Africa. So if you take a team like Liverpool, it doesn't have like a great history with race. It had quite racist fans in the 1980s. It was against their own players. So there was like that kind of like you're a Liverpool fan, but you're noticing all these kind of contradictory feelings that you're having, or that you're identifying with a team in which John Barnes is kicking off a banana that some of his own fans, he's like the best player at that time in Europe, in the UK, in the English Premier League, and the fans are saying that, oh, he's playing out of his skin. He's not black. He's surpassed being black. So just living through those kind of things, you make those connections. Just the other example I want to quickly give is the in 1988, there's like one of those kind of, there was this thing called the Littlewoods Cup. Nobody cared about it. I think they now call it the League Cup. And there was Luton Town was playing Arsenal. Arsenal again. And Arsenal was leading in the game, but eventually Luton Town won the game. I actually wrote about this. I wrote about like why am I so obsessed with English football. And the thing about this was there were two players on the Luton Town team, Brian Stain and his brother Mark. They were from Cape Town. They were basically from the townships. Literally, like I could have walked to where they had grown up. They're a little old, much older than I am. But their father, Abraham, had been against apartheid, and he had gone to Esau Stain. He had gone to the UK as an exile, and that's where his kids started playing, youth football, and eventually they played for Luton. So watching that game, and I wrote about like how for me that game was Arsenal 2, South Africa 3, because like Mark is scoring the goal, Brian is scoring the goals, and Mark setting up the goals. So if you sort of like, this is things about identity, national identity, the notion of a national team, to this question of, Greg, why am I calling this thing 11 named people? This is a Hobsbawm, quote about there's nothing that represents the Imagine. He says something like the Imagine community of millions seem more real as a team of 11 named people. So for me, I was like, I started imagining the South African team. There was no South African team, but I'm picking like a player who's playing in Scotland. I'm picking the players who play locally in South Africa, the ones who play in the NASL, for God's sake. And I'm constructing like a national team out of that in my imagination. So that, like, we're in all these different places, but I can totally see what's happening to Shireen as a kid, because you have that same kind of stuff is happening to you. Make those connections. And football is not just, you're not spending all your energy being mad at the stuff in football. It's also like sometimes like your refuge. It's like the place where you can imagine other kinds of things.
Well, I think you're pointing to something, both of you, That's really essential, I think, to this sense of loyalty or belonging that can be attached to national entities or to clubs, cities you possibly never set foot in, just because one person played, or because that you saw that one game that just seduced you or convinced you, or all things. I mean, those the sports loyalties can be sort of odd like this. But as you pointed to the Hobsbawm quote, and the idea that of course national teams seem more real, as you said, as a team of 11. Imagine communities of millions seem more real as a team of 11 named people. We know that sports has also been, especially modern sports and clubs, were originally very much a tool of colonialism. I mean, we can see this with all the English names in places where English is, not necessarily even spoken. And there's a long history of sports serving anti-colonial struggles as well. And so, not to recycle this oft-quoted quote, but can the master's tools dismantle the master's house? Like, how do we work this, this sort of within systems that we know to belong to things that we're fighting in some sense?
Yeah, sport power is imperial power, it seems like, with the way you think about it, And of course, we talked about cricket, the most snobby, clubby.
I mean, I have two things on that, and I'll answer by way of the T20, which I have, by the way, on like I watched the T20. I know a lot of people are like, it's not cricket, it's like a circus, it's power hitting, but it's still kind of, I like the Pakistani team at the moment. They're like my favorite to win this thing. I really like the way they play, because I have my issues with the South African team. But
can we talk about the corruption
I'm
of
gonna
the
get to this
cricket board as well?
No, the whole
talk
thing.
about
This
that?
is my thing. The thing is so one of the way that I think of this sort of you ask about the master's house and you ask about decolonization, and I'll talk in general. I don't know. It's so for the World Cup, the ICC said that all the teams, they made it sort of very clear that this is not a support of Black Lives Matter, because of all the kind of right-wing rhetoric that scares people off, like Black Lives Matter, people who don't know Black Lives Matter in other countries outside the US. So because they read right-wing propaganda telling them this is communist or whatever. Mm-hmm. So anyway, the ICC had said that all teams should get their players to kneel before games. Now, again, I see your point. It's like an empty gesture. And in the South African case, what people were saying was are you kidding? Even the Indian players who often are Modi supporters or Hindu nationalists who have some horrible politics, even they got the directive. They got the job. The job was just kneel, just do a minimal thing, even if you really don't believe in it, but just do that minimal thing that shows that you somehow respect this idea that everybody should have dignity. We could debate this stuff, but just at that level. So here comes the South African team from a country that has the structural racism reproduce themselves, the cricket setup in South Africa. I mean, there's probably people watching now, they know way more than I do about it's not like Quinton de Kock, this guy who got up, he didn't want to kneel, said wrote a thing and said, I've just stepped too far from me, I can't kneel or whatever. And people say he's white. I'm just gonna leave that there. So I'm not gonna say more because I don't want to get in trouble. But the issue is he said he didn't want to kneel, and it was and he said, oh, they only told me at the last minute. The funny thing about South Africa is there is currently in South Africa the equivalent of a truth commission about the structural racism and all the problems of cricket. Michael Holding, Michael Holding, who cried about the racism that his family faced when he came to England, the cricket commentators on Sky Sports, he went to testify there today. So it's this thing of saying oh, I don't know, kneel, my freedom of expression, these people are forcing me to do some bullshit. Bro, everybody knows that for months now in South Africa, we've talked about the racism in cricket. And this includes players telling stories about how Black players went to the team management and said during a team retreat a couple of years ago, can we talk about the Group Areas Act? Because the Black players want to talk about how their families were forcibly removed under apartheid. And the team management said something to the effect of, oh, this is not this. We don't want to go there. That's not for the culture of the team. There's things where a black player, I think last year during COVID, a black player said we should kneel during games, and it led to a whole blow up. And all the white players said, a lot of them said, I'm not kneeling. There were a few. This guy Rassi, the Van Dassen player, who's kneeling with the black players, and then there was a former captain Faf, who's really good, was a good player. He said something like, "All lives can only matter if Black lives matter." Like something he flipped it. But the thing is, like, this is not new. So this pretense of like, why are they making me to kneel is like troublesome. Now I want to quickly. I know I'm going on and on and on here, but let me just take it back to like when you ask like, can you decolonize? So even in a country like South Africa, you have that sports body called SACOS that I mentioned, who's sort of imagining a different kind of idea of like how to play sports. Follows like some of the people who were involved in that, like Cheryl Roberts. I don't know if you know her, Shireen. Like she's on Twitter, and people should follow her because she tweets old photos, like an archive of that whole sports history.
Yeah.
There's a ton of other people on Twitter who tries to like recover that history using social media, because nobody wants to write about it, because people say, oh, the black people didn't play cricket, didn't play rugby. Bro, there's a deep history. But long story short, in the late 1980s, when South Africa was going to a transition, sports also had to be transformed or decolonized, if you want to use that word. Decolonization speaks to that. Originally, it speaks to after the Second World War. Okay, what happened to like sports in South Africa was those people from the SACOS groups were kind of sidelined because they were arguing for a radical restructuring of the way you do sports in South Africa. And in those compromises between the ANC of Mandela and National Party politicians, like literally like white politicians, white sports administrators, we ended up with what we have now. Basically, they allowed those teams prematurely back into international sports, the white teams. So South Africa, when it first got back into international sports, it was represented by white teams, a white cricket team, a white rugby team, all white. Even that team of 95 that won the Rugby World Cup. So in that sort of like moment in which people are sort of like making sense of their world, the impression was created that this was changed. We're done. We've changed. We've reconciled. And the teams, if you go back, what's that Hansie Cronje documentary on Netflix? The team is like an all-white team. So it's a bizarre like how that stuff went. Now, if Quinton de Kock does what he does today, with other white players like Pat Simcox, Boeta Dippenaar, all these dudes who said, I'm not kneeling, they called it, this is a communism, and they quoted a Trump propaganda. This is basically how their logic. Because the people before them, had come to understand that we had already dealt with this stuff. The black players are like, bro, the racism get reproduced, whether it's in netball, whether it's, in women's cricket, in women's rugby. Like people are saying like the same stuff is happening in all these other sports, but people are saying to them, white people are saying to them, we had reconciliation. We had a truth commission. We had like the end of apartheid. Why do you want to bring that up now? But for most black people in South Africa, that's how they've experienced things. And just to put one last little thing, and I won't say a lot about this, the other part of this is also the context is the professionalization of sports also happened right when South Africa became free. So if like we have this imperative for like a national reckoning that people should have to live their aspirations through a sports that is decolonized or transformed, it happened right at the time that it is now about winning.
Yeah.
And if you say we must win, then the people who had the better facilities, coaching, and India, if you play in India, if you play in Australia, if you play in England, they don't have energy to like listen to you go on about like, oh, I'm trying to make change. You got to win. And winning in a country like South Africa, in which the national ethos, including for the ANC, including for the new black middle class, it's about winning. It's about being this like leader in Africa. There's no energy. There's no time for us to deal with this shit. And that's the context in which Quinton de Kock is like, I could probably get away with this if I stand up, because he also knows in South Africa, there's like in terms of the public sphere, there are people who can defend him. There's like civil society organizations of whites who can defend you, say, etc.
I'm going to pass the mic to Shireen, but just quickly, Sean, you had a little insert in there, decolonization. Like, oh, after World War II, but actually whatever you were saying just now illustrates its kind of potence as a term even now, and why I guess Greg and I insist on still using that word despite all the criticism and, oh, it's a buzz and it means nothing and universities are messing with us, it's corporate. It's not really. I think it has some meaning, and what you just explained made me have the feels about that. Shireen, how to decolonize? Should we give our we've made a big hype on social media saying that's what we're going to talk about. So I want to hear your thought.
Okay, well, I'll start by saying it's complicated. So here's the thing. There was a part of me that's like, no, you can't actually decolonize the structure. Was the entire basis of it was to harm and was to disenfranchise and was to exclude. However, when we look at it let's flip it a bit and look at resistance. Look at how Black communities, how queer communities, how immigrant communities, how undocumented communities have resisted. We've learned how to push back and disrupt and resist within this system. So do I think we can take some of those learnings and then apply it to the larger global thing? Like if you were going to tell me years ago that I would be on a sports center, or I would have a podcast. Like I wouldn't know what a podcast was, but I would have the opportunity with journalists and academics, and I will shout out my team, Dr. Mira Davis, Dr. Brenda Elsey, Lindsay Gibbs, and Jessica Luther, that we would have an opportunity as women to talk about sports with a feminist and an intersectional feminist perspective. I would have been like, no, that's not going to happen. So there are ways to change. Now, I will highlight the idea of with abuse cases and cases of violence against athletes, and very much that what we keep hearing about, with exception of the Chicago NHL team, is men in power abusing women athletes, right? But that's what we're hearing very much about. So them resigning and walking away isn't a solution, because they leave the mess still. This is very much about the institutions and what they uphold. So transparency is essential. I think even addressing it. So, I mean, getting back a couple, sort of conversations, tidbits, the idea that India is kneeling is hysterically funny to me, because, I mean, how do they treat their own Dalit community? I mean, they're literally genocidally going after Muslims. Like, it's embarrassing. I'm embarrassed for them. It's like Israel saying that they're the most democratic Middle Eastern country, which is also...
And they really say it all the time.
Yeah, it's so bad. Like, you're like, could be the Onion writing itself. It's parody in real time. And I live in a country that is literally founded on Indigenous genocide and Black slavery. That's what Canada is. And in that, there can't be a reckoning. People keep talking about a reckoning. I'm like, we have to recognize before we reconcile. We're not even at the reckoning phase yet. Recognizing, reconciling, and reckoning, like, they're different verbs that everyone keeps throwing together, in this sort of smorgasbord of let's fix it. Do I think sport can inherently be fixed? No, because the system is rotted to the core. Do I think maybe we can create new systems? Absolutely. I do. I do believe sport is a connector. You'll never hear me say it's a unifier, because I don't think that's true. And it sounds super right-wingy to say it and like weird. But I will say it's a connector of people. I can go anywhere in the world and I can play football. I can be in Brazil. I played in Foz de Iguaçu outside of a masjid. I went there and they were like, why is this old auntie playing football with us? But like, it's, played in Jordan and some street there. Yeah. Like, you can play in different places. But I do want to point out something. And Sean very rightly spoke about racial systems, but let's add another layer of the gender system. And let's add another layer of the conversations we're having that further exclude women and racialized women, and the targeting of those women. We talked about Dudi Chan. We talked about Caster Semenya. We talked about Horace. I mean, if you want to talk about decolonizing, but even in, let's just say, Nigeria, it's Black men in the boardroom, right? It's African men running, and Nigeria literally had to sit in. And we're talking about Asisat Oshoala, who plays for Barcelona, who's the first woman to win a Champions League trophy, an African woman. She had to sit in and join her teammates, Nigerian teammates, to get paid for the winnings they had already had, for the winning they had done as a team. So this is about systems of colonization that still fester. And what are we doing about it in those communities? Like, don't even get me started on Pakistan and what a disaster that football association is that you already know of. Hajar Khan is the captain of Pakistan national team. Literally, her career has been absolutely destroyed by corruption and politicization. What is the word? Politicization. And, so she's gone to the north of Pakistan, and in Hunza Valley, she's doing development camps to help keep the spirit alive of football in that country, because it's disheartening is what it is. Yes. So, but within that, I will say this, and I say it often, women find solutions to the problems that men create consistently. Les hijabeuses is racialized women who are just like they are resisting French the French regime is what I'll call them, honestly, and they uphold xenophobia, they uphold racist systems. Don't even get me started on white feminists. So even within the discussion of women, I do want to point out that white women have a tendency to uphold patriarchy. That's toxic. And we do have to have that discussion with it. Sport. I'm not interested when people come and say, we're going to diversify. Here's white women. I'm like, that's a country club dinner. That's not diversification and racial. I'm sorry. No, I'm not actually not sorry. It's what it is. So we have to be careful when we talk about inclusion and who are we including at what tables. This is one of the things the WNBA has done beautifully. There are blueprints for how to, having a social justice committee. They have their own players, the Chicago Sky, who recently won the championship, wearing shirts that say abortion is healthcare, because women are inherently their own advocates, which is something that men don't have to do. And we are out here talking about our own value, our own merit, and then we're also advocating for things. So, it's, again, I end with, it's complicated.
Thanks, Shireen. I just want, I know Sean wants to add something about the India kneeling thing, but I just want to quickly add a very academic-ish point, which is like, we can't talk about decolonization or colonialism or racism without seeing like the heavy, like not even the heavy, the kind of totalizing gender system that goes into creating those constructs. Like, you can't talk about race without gender, or gender necessarily without race, if you're talking about any of the colonial stuff or everything that goes on in the colonial present, if that's how we want to call it. But anyway, so I'm glad for the folding in that you've done. Sean, sorry, you were going to say something.
No, I was just gonna. Oh, I think Greg wanted to say something, but let me just say my quick thing. It's like one or 2 minutes. I'm not, like I was saying to you, like, it's ridiculous watching the Indian team kneel, but if you think about how this plays in a place like South Africa, which is where you have reactionaries, particularly white, some black, few, saying, "Oh, this is communism," blah blah blah, like, repeating all the nonsense. The power of watching, like, if England, so because these people, they don't listen to the local pressure, and they're sort of immune to it now. They kind of dismiss it. They minimize it, and they say, "Oh, you're just complaining. Why are you bringing this up now?" But if England is kneeling, if Australia is kneeling, if India is kneeling, the effect that it has on white South Africans, because I think what happened to Quinton de Kock was, he's so, like, in the West Indian media, in Indian media, I know, in Indian cricket media, we can go on about Indian cricket media, they were like saying how he was a racist and this and that. He wants to play in India in the IPL in Chennai, I think. I think they said to him, "You're not coming. You're not going to be. You can't come back," or whatever. So it's like, then he apologized, So, well, I don't think that's exactly what happened, but this is the kind of
the domino effect you're talking about.
So it's hollow thing what India does if you follow the debate in India, but in bringing to the head, like, the struggle to decolonize or deal with racism in South African sports, because you couldn't do it because Mandela had covered it for them. You had to force the issue at the World Cup. They've been for months, they said, "You must kneel." And they said, "I want to kneel, it's my choice, blah, blah." But if you do it in the World Cup in front of all the cameras, now you blow it up. So it's like, I get the point. India, what is it? India is like a collateral damage in this little thing. It's a stray bullet. I'll take it. in this instance, I'll take it. And tomorrow I want to argue again about how hypocritical India was.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's fair. For me, it's not even just the hypocrisy, with the genocide of Muslims and the daily violence against Dalits in India. And I know people do selective causes. I know everybody can't get it right on everything. My biggest issue with that was like the rampant anti-blackness of India.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, really, you care about Black lives today? That is just not even gelling.
I was called a Kali when I was like living in Chicago.
I mean, I feel
Yeah,
a certain way about this. Like, I think that in all, like, I keep hearing in circles, people will come to me, and I feel as a non-Black person of color, like, I feel like my community needs to pick up the mantle and carry, just being cognizant. I'm a settler, but I'm also somebody who has privilege, linguistic privilege, education privilege, and knowing that, my friends and colleagues who are Black experience racism far more egregiously, and so do Indigenous folks. So, like, I don't experience that in that way. But that being said, like, so many people reach out to me because apparently I'm very articulate for a Muslim woman. That's the first thing I get. You speak English so well, right? Yeah. So those microaggressions aside, the idea of kneeling had become performative in so much, but it was a way to start a conversation. I'm not saying that what happened with Colin Kaepernick, 2017, but and the way that the message was, really messed up and thwarted in a way and tried to, but the discussion started talking, and very quickly social media played a role in this. If George Floyd's murder wasn't captured on social media, we'd be having a very different conversation. And, it's not just about showing humanity, it's about injustice, which is not something white people have ever had to deal with, like, truly in the same way. So as much as I think that, and I don't give cookies to people, but my colleague and dear friend, Dr. Amira Rose Davis has taught me a lot about grace and taught me a lot about this, this idea. And I'm not trying to start a conversation about cancel culture, but I'm saying we don't give cookies to people for doing the least, right. But there's some folks that we have to recognize have never had to think about it at all. I don't think of allyship anymore. I think about conspirators and collaborators in active anti-racism. Like, people are like, oh, be kind. I'm like, I don't fucking want you to be kind. I want you to be anti-racist. I'll hold my door open by myself. I want you to be actively engaged in eradicating anti-Blackness and anti-indigeneity and anti-xenophobia, anti-transphobia. Like, you know what I mean? This is what I need. And part of that is the language, but we have to educate people. And that's a lot of labor, but I don't see, there's a part of this that's performative, but it's part of an education piece as well that we have to do. And again, I struggle with this. And can I just sit here and mourn the loss of Zayn Malik and Gigi Hadid instead? Because I'm sad about that, But and I was going to bring this up. I was going to bring it up. And thank you for holding space for me for that sadness. It's complicated again. But my point is that it is work that actively has to be done, and that has traditionally been done by Black women and Indigenous women. Have been holding so much of the weight, and that we have to do. So, there are ways in which young folks disrupt by kneeling. We saw, that one cheerleader at that, predominantly white university kneeling during the anthem. We're also not monolithic, and neither are the gestures. They're contextual. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's other ways to be useful in this process, but I don't want to write off kneeling altogether, but it's contextual.
No, I'm glad you said that, because we had some kind of a question around that. Sorry, go, Greg.
I think in matters of spectacle like sports, right? I mean, we can always find fault with representation, but when you're on a stage that big, anything you do matters in different dimensions, right? I mean, you can have gestures emptied of meaning, but they're also still gestures that, as Shireen was saying, like, I get presented to people that may never have seen them otherwise, however empty, right? I mean, the thing about the Indian team, for example, is that even if it means nothing to them, all of a sudden they're doing something that people might wonder about, right? It's like, even if only to make fun of them, right? And that's certainly not what they were going for, but if that's what happens, it's still that.
Or people might be like, maybe I should learn something about Black Lives Matter.
Sure.
I should learn about racism, and then maybe it opens up the conversation. So like the tweets by people saying, actually, this is hypocritical. So Dalit activists can like insert themselves in that moment and be like, oh yeah, here's what's really going on in India: colorism, skin care, skin glass, skin lightness. Like you could use that, cast. You drop it in that moment. You use this opportunity. It's like, yesterday you stood with Modi. Why are you now doing like? So like I totally see the hypocrisy of this, but I get also like in that moment you can use it to pull out something else.
Yeah, you're gonna have to think about that, Sean, next time you write pieces on Beyonce.
I do want to add.
Next time I get pieces or I write pieces?
Hit pieces. I write them, you publish them,
I wanted to add really quickly when we're talking about resources, the University of Alberta in Canada runs a 12-week free course on Indigenous history in this country, and not whitewashed history. But I think that's really important. We're having a conversation about decolonization. The first place I look to is Indigenous communities to lead those conversations. So I'm going to drop it in the chat. Sure. It's actually free. It's something that I think we should all have, to think about in the ways in which we can. I think I put it in the wrong chat. I'll put it in the comments.
I'll put it in.
You can put. So that's something else I want to say, and I just want to thank the teachers that I've had, all three of you included, for this conversation and moving it forward. And it's not going to be graceful and seamless. It's going to be messy, as it always is, and complicated. And I've learned a lot about grace and moving forward, and people have been, and I thank Black communities and trans communities for teaching me and giving me the knowledge, which wouldn't have happened otherwise. And you make mistakes, and disabled communities have also called me in gently to say, you need to unlearn this. And this is a process of unlearning. And I'm still on that journey too. But like conversations like this are inherently important. We'll still banter about how much we love Sadio Mane. We'll still do that. We'll still talk about Mo Salah and whether or not he has eradicated Islamophobia in Liverpool, which he has not. We know that.
Or his own place in Egyptian politics.
Oh, we can't even start about Egyptian which is a mess. And, but there are ways to do this through sport. So sport being a very powerful vehicle to do that. Be it this. And just as a last point, I broke a story last week about the Canadian women's national team, which also has the first non-binary trans person to win a gold medal at the Olympics. And these steps are important. And they've used that time and that platform to talk about the abuse that was suffered between 1988 and 2008 by a former coach of the Vancouver Whitecaps. So there's people using their platforms on sport to do this, and a shout out to them and all the other athletes that are disclosing, coaches, former people associated. So there's a lot of power here that we wield and that we don't realize. And that's a part, I don't know if that's part of the decolonization process, but it's a part of the empowerment process.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Just a quick little add-on here to something Shireen said there about like, it can be messy. It's not going to be perfect. So one of the complaints that some people have around the Quentin de Kock thing, not that I want to harbor on him because I know that's in the news, is they say, oh, the Cricket South Africa, which is like this, the controlling body of cricket in South Africa, they said, oh, they handled this, it's like ham-fisted, they didn't workshop it, they told them at the last minute. Sometimes when to make stuff like this happen, it's not perfect. It's going to be chaotic. But out of this, there's like a real big thing came out of it now. Even this guy who said, I don't want to kneel, now he has to say, I have to educate myself about Black Lives Matter. And I know there's people in South Africa, for example, who said, let's have people on programs to come and tell people, what is Black Lives Matter really? Stop reading all this right-wing propaganda. Learn some white South Africans should learn what is Black Lives Matter and stop repeating what Trump said and so on. So it's not perfect.
God.
Cricket South Africa is not going to be perfect. The people who run it, they decided like the night before, hey, for tomorrow's game against the West Indies, we're all kneeling. So they spring it on the place. So what? It's not going to be perfect. You have to sometimes you force the issue. And once we force the issue, now we've won that victory, but now we got to build on it.
Right. Yeah. I have something that's not perfect, but this is how I'm going to play us all off today. I had to reflect on music. It wasn't easy. I have originally considered only having songs by soccer players, but I thought that was the worst way
No.
to play a song.
Root Roulette. I hope you got the reggae. You got the Root Roulette reggae song.
I focused on songs about players and athletes. I tried to be and slightly chronological. So we'll start with Jackson do Pandeiro with Ore Pele. Start with the King. This is from the 70s. After all the World Cups, we move on to Cameroon with another king, Roger Mila. I think that song was made right after World Cup 1990, and here it is. The sound might be a little off. George Dixon is known for Makossa Zouk, right? A mix of French Caribbean and Cameroonian music. We move on to a rare song about. I hope you remember her, one of the greatest track athletes from France, Marie-Josée Pérec. This is from a Martinican musician called Sahel. It's called Marie-Josée.
Ils sont vexés de la discussion, ils laissent des visages méchants. Et qui sont ces gens qui te mettent en soi-disant et qui t'entendent? Marie-Josée, je fais qu'ils disent des atrocités sur toi. Le monde et les médias peuvent toujours causer, car je sais combien la France te doit.
Yeah, he said, "I know how much France owes you." Don't we all know? All right, a rare song about a women's soccer player. I hope you recognize her. The greatest, arguably, Marta Vieira da Silva by Riam. She's a French rapper because, soccer is universal.
Plume main droite, rage dans les tripes, je pose mon spin quand l'orage dessine, capte ma vibe sans les sous-titres, mate la technique, Martha hat-trick. Plume main droite, rage dans les tripes, je pose mon spin quand l'orage dessine, capte ma vibe sans les sous-titres, mate la technique, Martha hat-trick.
So you can't see the video, but it's all...
Não vai ter uma Marta pra sempre, não vai ter uma Cristiane. E o futebol feminino depende de vocês para sobreviver. Então pense nisso, valorize mais.
You remember that emotional call from the World Cup? Or maybe not, if you watched. All right, here, a special one. Mogwai, who actually made an entire album, a soundtrack to Zidane, a 21st Century Portrait. A great film. You guys like it? Right? Great film, great song. I'm just going to play an excerpt from this one instead of...
I was just going to say, you're introducing so many topics right now.
Oh, yeah. Well, sorry.
You're just introducing like a million other topics here. I was like, you're going to stop and we're going to talk for an hour about Roger Mila. Yeah. And I about Marta. I was like, bro, what are you doing this to me right now?
I mean, I was waiting for you to do Michael Tello's like I Say Tu Pego, which is about Neymar. But I guess you didn't do that one. I'm just kidding.
I'm not doing Neymar on this show.
Oh my God.
All right.
Okay.
I don't know if you've seen the film. It's pretty amazing, and the soundtrack is haunting, actually, which I guess is fitting for Zidane. And finally, last but not least,
sorry.
Yeah, just one more. My first World Cup, South Africa, with the song for Caster Semenya.
Oh.
Those.
Jabalego, jabalego, jabalego. Turkey, Costa Simenya. Same time, Dani Sumalema. Ilabatenga ngale kruka glebageti. Kibeli Cresita ya Tumindu. Mabes bona bati skims commandos. Ohotobo, hotobo, hotobo. Stimula marani big sulimaniniki. Jabalego, jabalego, jabalego. Turkey, Costa Simenya. Same time, Dani Sumalema. Ilabatenga ngale kruka glebageti.
This is it.
Wow.
Miss Fan. So
Wow.
you're moonlighting as a DJ.
Yes. Sometimes we get kicked off of the YouTube things because Greg picks songs. Let's hope not.
Funnily enough, it happened when I played that song by a French rapper about Mohamed Salah. That's the one.
Wait,
That's
and you
it.
said you
That's
should
the one.
take it down. They ask you to take it down.
They did.
They blocked the.
Well, there's a bot. It's like there's some kind of thing that like trolls. It's its job to like see if people are playing music that are copyrighted.
Yep.
And then anyway, you could. Yeah, I'm not a computer head.
I think if you do audio like less than 8 seconds or something like
you can
that,
still get
you're
away with
okay.
it.
Yeah.
We'll find a way.
over
We'll
it.
find a loophole, Gregory. We will find a loophole here.
Next.
So this gives me Greg. You should do a mixtape of like. There's a mixtape in there somewhere.
There's also a
Spotify.
Spotify list that you can
make a
just do and
Spotify
send
list
to
of this
me.
stuff.
I agree. He should do all these things. So today is the one Friday where I have like all day open, but Sean and Greg were very difficult with me yesterday about having to leave on time. And Shireen, I don't know what your scene is, but I let's conclude. But I just wanted to add that I could linger forever. This was an extraordinary, brilliant conversation and the perfect season finale for us. Hopefully we're back because Greg has gone from like playing a limit of 3 songs to like, I don't know, what was it, 6 or 7
It was
today?
the finale. It had to be final.
Yeah. And all the recordings will be on the YouTube of Warscapes. We'll put them on the Vimeo of Warscapes, and it will roll on Twitter, of course, and on Facebook. I think it's called Meta now. I don't even know what's happening, guys.
I don't have the bandwidth to deal with
Well,
that
is the meta thing? Is that I just saw that this morning? Is that the right would like to call it meta, or is that what Facebook calls it?
I have no idea. I'm too meta for this.
Plan to rename.
Okay, so I do want a photo of us all before we go. So everybody smile.
Anyway, and we'll continue with the decolonizing. Greg and I have a Los Angeles Review of Books column that comes out every few weeks. That's going to feature some other people who are on here. And hopefully we are back like next year or earlier. We shall see what.
I'm shocked that before you go, I'm shocked for cutting you off also, sorry, but I'm shocked that we never said anything terrible about Arsenal today. I was like ready for that. I wanted to say some stuff. But
Okay.
anyway.
We're not doing that here, Sean. I will come to New York and we will all meet up, but we're not doing this here.
We have to watch a game together at some point in the same room.
Follow Muriti Marungi.
Yeah, we got to come and hang out in the same room.
Muriti is wonderful. And
I
will say this, that the Arsenal community is self-deprecating and was self-hating.
That's the worst.
It's
Liverpool fans do not like to hear negative things about their club and they'll go for you. Arsenal fans spend their energy just going at their own club.
Yeah.
This is
100%.
crazy.
100%. It's chaotic, but we love that. So
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Shireen. That was awesome. All right. Thank you, Greg. I'll see you elsewhere. And I hope to meet everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.